I mentioned on Monday night that we are heading, according to the global investment bank UBS, to a debt by 2024-25 of $2 trillion, 80% of the country's wealth. I cited the words of the Austrian economist and historian Ludwig von Mises, who famously said, "I'd hoped to be the agent of reform, but it turned out I was merely the chronicler of decline." How do we pay off this debt? In Britain, Boris Johnson has raised taxes to their highest levels since the Second World War. It's opened a simmering civil war within the Tory party, with the Prime Minister left to rebut claims that he's betrayed Conservative voters. He insists he still wants low taxes. Andrew Leigh is the Federal Shadow Assistant Minister for Treasury and Charities. He's the Federal Labor member for the seat of Fenner in the ACT. It was formerly the seat of Fraser, but the Electoral Commission decided that, effective from the 2016 election, it would become the electorate of Fenner to honour the scientist Frank Fenner, F-E-N-N-E-R, who, ironically, given the debate today about coronavirus, had a distinguished career in the field of virology, where his two greatest achievements are cited as overseeing the eradication of smallpox and the control, some of us remember this, of Australia's rabbit plague through the introduction of the myxoma virus. Frank Fenner died in Canberra in 2010. He'd been the Professor of Microbiology at the new John Curtin School of Medical Research at the ANU. I should point out, the rabbit plague, I was a kid, it was devastating. But prior to the release of the myxoma virus as a means to biologically control the rabbits, Frank Fenner and the famous Frank McFarlane Burnett, after whom that institute in Melbourne is named, and Ian Clooney's Ross injected themselves with the myxoma virus to prove it was not dangerous to human beings. Well, back to Andrew Leigh, who was formerly a professor of economics at ANU. He has a PhD in public policy from Harvard. He graduated from the University of Sydney with first-class honours in arts and law. He's a fellow of the Australian Academy of Social Sciences and a past recipient of the Young Economist Award, a prize given every 2 years by the Economic Society of Australia to the best economist under 40. Andrew Leigh is currently 49. He's married with 3 sons. He's a prolific author. And I've spoken to him before because he's a keen marathon runner, and we talked about honouring Peter Norman, the great Australian athlete who won the silver medal for the 200 metres in Mexico City in 1968. But because he supported the 2 black Americans, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, who were protesting the injustice to black Americans, Peter Norman was never selected for Australia again. Well, that's, by the way, I think, of interesting background, but Andrew Leigh has applied a very clinical mind to these JobKeeper payments. You will recall they were rightly made to businesses who would otherwise have to lay off staff due to the economic impact of coronavirus. The total cost, he estimates, around $90 billion, $90,000 million. To receive the payment, the businesses and not-for-profit organisations had to demonstrate or forecast a particular shortfall in revenue. So if you're a business with a turnover of over $1 billion, you qualified if the revenue shortfall was 50%, under $1 billion 30%, and not-for-profits 15%. That is, if there was a shortfall in revenue as a response to the government response to coronavirus. Now, as you know, I've always described that response as disproportionate. But Andrew Leigh is now arguing that $13,000 million, according to an analysis by the Parliamentary Business Office, went to firms which increased their revenue, firms which increased their turnover, and that the government also gave money to profitable overseas-owned companies, leading, he argues, to tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars going to offshore owners. Well, as Ludwig von Mises asked, are we to be an agent of reform or the chronicler of decline? Andrew Leigh joins me. Andrew, thank you for your time and congratulations on an extraordinary career to date of remarkable scholarship. What reform is needed here? I mean, you're not opposed to wealthy people, but you're saying that the government poured tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into the pockets of some of Australia's wealthiest people.
JobKeeper was a necessary scheme and it saved jobs. But the problem, Alan, as you've so articulately pointed out there, is that too much of it went to firms with rising revenues. It was a good idea, badly implemented. And that $13 billion amounts to some $1,300 for every one of your viewers, every household in Australia. I expect most Australian households could think of better things to do with $1,300 than find a firm.
Absolutely. I mean, let's just take Louis Vuitton, who received $6 million in JobKeeper, but increased the dividend it paid to its overseas owner, LVMH, by $6.5 million. And you're saying the majority shareholder in LVMH is the Frenchman Bernard Arnault, who was the richest man in the world at one point in 2020. Has the government made any attempt to reclaim this money?
They haven't asked for a penny back. And the fact is that we're not going to be demanding repayment, but the government should at least be asking the question of these firms as to whether they'll do the right thing by their corporate social responsibilities.
Well, let's take another one. OPSM, you say, received a 58 million JobKeeper contribution from the taxpayer, but they increased their profit by 53 million. And the owner of OPSM is Leonardo Del Vecchio, and as you say, reportedly the second richest man in Italy, the 22nd richest man in the world, a net worth of 26 billion, and our taxpayers listening to you tonight are forking out money to him.
It's a scheme that was designed to help battlers, but ended up assisting too many offshore billionaires. Too much of the money was allowed to slip through Josh Frydenberg's fingers and to offshore shareholders.
Righto, Best and Less. I mean, viewers here shop at Best and Less. Their revenue rose by 77 million over the 2020 financial year, but they got 46.2 million in JobKeeper. The car retailer, AP Eagers, got 130 million in JobKeeper, but they posted a $156 million profit compared to a $140 million loss the year before. Now, I mean, you've raised this. What's the government's view towards recovering this an enormous amount of money?
Well, the government's view seems to be that if you're against JobKeeper waste, you must be against JobKeeper, which is, of course, an absurd position, Alan. Just because we don't believe that money should have been wasted doesn't mean that we're against the scheme. The Prime Minister's accused me of playing the politics of envy, but this is the politics of frugality. We ought to be as careful with the public's finances as we would be with our own money.
Yeah, 13 billion, to put our viewers, 13 billion, and this is not Andrew, this is the Parliamentary Budget Office. 13 billion, according to the Parliamentary Budget Office, went to companies whose turnover was higher in 2020 than it had been in the same period in 2019. So, I mean, as you say, if there are about 10 million households in Australia, that's 1,300 for every household. Your party, I mean, Business and the union movement have argued in favour of the whole subsidy JobKeeper thing, and you just said I think it was a good idea, but badly implemented. But what happened in Britain, Canada, New Zealand and the United States? Because here, the wage subsidy scheme doesn't require the names of recipients to be published. And the ACT, the ASIC, which is the corporate watchdog, required publicly listed firms to disclose JobKeeper. And then, of course, the corporate reports came in, and that's how you established what was being paid to profitable companies.
That's right. So, Alan, we had no transparency over this scheme in Australia, unlike Britain, Canada, New Zealand, the United States, which published all of the names of recipients of their wage subsidy schemes. And when we've asked the government to disclose the big firms that got JobKeeper, they've flat out refused. We're not going.
And some of these companies that got this money gave the boss a bonus. I mean, I don't think this is a party political issue, which is the reason I'm talking to you. This is a question of what is right and fair with taxpayers' money. Professor Judith Sloan has said that, quote, the wildly expensive JobKeeper will rank as the single most irresponsible and reckless spending program ever undertaken by a government. I just ask you again, what evidence is that the government is doing anything about clawing back this money?
None, I'm afraid, Alan. And I don't think we should be demanding money back from firms, but I think we should at least be asking. And Conservatives such as Nikki Savva, Janet Albrechtsen and Judith Sloan have rightly flagged that the government mismanaged this scheme. It gave too much money to firms that didn't need it, which meant there was too little to assist workers through the ongoing lockdowns of this year.
Quite. And, of course, JobKeeper did save jobs, but as you say, not one of those jobs was saved by giving money to firms with rising revenue. You've asked, haven't you, which firms received JobKeeper, and you have asked the government what they're doing about it. They become very defensive.
Yes, they've thrown the shroud of transparency over the entire scheme, as is their want. I mean, we've seen that when we've tried to get to the bottom of sports rorts and car park rorts, just that nothing to see here approach. As though the money that they're paying out was somehow money from a political party rather than taxpayer money.
Well, I think one of the conclusions we could draw, Andrew Leigh, is I think you're a bit too smart for all these people. This bloke is a very smart bloke, and I think everything he's arguing here is fair. It's taxpayers' money. And if you juxtapose that against the first speech to the Parliament that Treasurer Frydenberg made when he said we must always remember that whenever we create a new arm of bureaucracy or expand a field of activity, we're not spending our own money, we're spending the money of our citizens who look to us as the guardians of their wealth. So JobKeeper doesn't seem to fit into that philosophical statement, Andrew. But thank you for talking to us tonight. Keep up the running. Keep up the running. I know you wanted to talk to me about charities as well. I think that's a very important point, and we'll have a yarn about that at a later point.
Look forward to it, Alan. Thanks again.
Not at all. There is Andrew Leigh.